B?
Well, we are live, so B, if you haven't tweeted this link, go ahead and get it out to everybody. Hey, everyone. It is Lunch with Lincoln for Monday, November 29th. It is 9 a.m. in the West and noon in the East. I am your host for today, Reed Galen, co-founder of the Lincoln Project. And as always, my older brother, Rick Wilson, joins me. Rick, thanks for coming on today.
Good to see you, Reed. Good to see you. You
So
guys have
listen,
Thanksgiving?
Yeah, I did. I hope you did too. And I hope everybody out there had a great holiday. I hope that if you had relatives with whom you disagree on politics, you were at least able to get through the mashed potatoes before you started throwing them at each other. So Rick, I want to talk about a few things today. First, we dropped a new ad. And B, why don't we go ahead and run that now? And then Rick, you can take us through a little bit of the creative and where we go from here.
The Republicans know what they're doing, costing lives by fighting vaccinations and smart responses to COVID, dividing the country with racial propaganda, embracing violence and domestic terror tactics, all to pave the way for Trump's return and a GOP takeover. We're the Lincoln Project, and we're here to do one thing: defeat them. Join us. Get in the fight.
So, Rick, I mean, we've gotten some grief from what I've now decided to call the commentariat.
Sure.
It starts somewhere north of the Arlington southern border and stretches up through New York City somewhere. That somehow, Trump isn't a problem. He'll always be a problem, but where do you see the Lincoln Project as we head into 2022? Everybody obviously knows about the ads we did last year, the work we did specific to Trump last year. As we like to say, the biggest mistake in all these things is fighting the last war first. But second, last year, I know this sounds crazy, will seem easy compared to this coming year. So how do you see that as we get in, as we come to the end of 21 and we get into 22?
For sure. Reed, one of the things about some of the grief we've taken in the last, period, there is an ecosystem in Washington that no matter how viciously they fight with each other, sometimes there's a sort of sense of an immune response to anything that isn't what they're used to. And we're not something they're used to. We came out of the Republican Party and we're fighting now against a lot of what we once worked with, not because of an ideological preference or a change on our part, but because we recognize that the Republican Party, as it is constituted today in the era of Trump, is fundamentally broken and fundamentally anti-small d Democratic. And it's showing us more and more of that all the time, which makes it very clear what the stakes are in 2022 and 2024. And I will say this, we have a phrase inside the Lincoln Project that we've used a long time. And so we're sick of being right. And there has been a little boomlet the last few weeks from Glenn Youngkin to Chris Christie. Oh, they're the saviors of the party. It's going to be all different. Trump's done. He's in the past. Don't worry about Trump. You're only talking about Trump for whatever reason. We're talking about Trump because he's the reality of our politics. He's defined the GOP. He's reshaped it completely. It is not it is not our dad's Republican Party anymore.
Right.
And here we are. With a 2022 that all the DC conventional wisdom is it's a very difficult year for Democrats. Off-year elections for the party in power typically are. But I will say that, we're tuning up for this fight now. We're preparing for it now. And one thing I think people know is that we don't ever bullshit them about how tough things are and how bad things are and how much of a challenge it's going to be. So, that's one of the reasons that people in the old Republican Party who would like to pretend that Trump is gone and they can just reshape it and reboot it and run it through the car wash, as I like to say, those folks, they're living in a fantasy world. Chris Christie is not going to be the nominee. Ron DeSantis is not going to be the nominee. Nobody else is going to be the nominee if Donald Trump is alive and pulling breath into his lungs. So
I want to get to a little bit of that, that inability or unwillingness to sort of see the world as it is in a second, but looking into next year, the thing that I'm interested in, you're right. Look, I mean, history says that first-term presidents always have a very difficult time in their
Yep.
first midterm, right?
Always.
Last time, 120 years, or since 1900, I guess, right? Only three times, has that happened. The last time was 2002. George W. Bush picked up seats. That was obviously immediately post 9/11, or a
There's
year
big
past 9/11.
externality there. Yeah.
Huge externality. So, these things are uncommon, but not impossible. And I think certainly we are in a time where, for all of the things that the Democrats have working against them, again, whether or not it's history, whether or not it's their inability to organize and coordinate, on a message or on a, even a fighting ethos, we shouldn't underestimate the fact that, like, Republicans have pretty much abandoned anything in the concept of public service or the greater good, or even governing at its baseline level, right? There was a story out this morning that more Republican states, or Republican-led states, I should say, are going to pass, anti-mask mandates, or, laws against mandating masks in schools, right, even as this Omicron thing now starts to pop up, which all of the folks I've talked to in the medical field, say we probably need about 4 weeks, maybe 30 days to really understand the full impact of that. But, they have, I believe, in my gut anyway, Rick, is that they've over-rotated on the culture issues, because it's like eating fried chicken without getting fat. It tastes really, really good, so I'm just going to keep doing it. But one day you wake up and you've got heart disease and diabetes, which I think leaves a lot of open field for people like us and our allies to go gobble up territory from Republicans, because they're good for Americans like that stuff, right? Both tonally and culturally. But also, most people don't want to, like, the whole, would you have a beer with Marjorie Taylor Greene? Like, I don't think so.
Reed, I think there's a couple things in what you were just talking about that I think are really important. One of the things that we've done in terms of how we've been positioned in the political space in this country is we'll work with anybody, from Liz Cheney to AOC. We'll work with anybody on the spectrum who believes that we are at a crisis moment in our country, that we are in a moment where our republic is in danger, that the things that the contemporary Republican Party has started to embrace are enormously dangerous for the future, and they need to be resisted and fought. You've got Greg Abbott right now, who is going into winter in Texas. He's praying for a warm winter, because what he's done to prepare himself for another ice storm is not a goddamn thing.
Right.
He's given utility companies billions of dollars to do nothing. And as for other Texas leadership, I guess Ted Cruz has probably made his reservations for Cancun. But other than that, they've abandoned the idea of governance. He spends every day, Omicron's coming. And instead of talking about what Texas is going to do to encourage more vaccinations, more masking, more countermeasures, he's like, well, South Africans illegally crossed the Mexican border. We're going to build a wall. I got to bet that the number
That's a hell of a wall across the South Atlantic.
Right. I bet the number of South Africans crossing in from Mexico is so de minimis that it defies imagination.
Well, I would say that it's zero.
I would say that it's zero. I would say that this is in the realm of what we call complete horse shit on Greg Abbott. Well, look, and it's you've got folks like Ron DeSantis who are talking about illegal immigration, in Florida, which is, I'm kind of missing where our border with Mexico is on this whole panic. Instead of dealing with the fact that Florida is a state now that's leading the country in the death count. This is these guys have given it up, and all the candidates you see running for office next year, they're not running on some new idea of liberty or individual freedom or free markets. They're saying things like, well, if a company doesn't do what we think is right ideologically, the purpose of the GOP is to punish them. Guys like J.D. Vance are saying that. Blake Masters is saying that.
Marco Rubio is
saying that. Yeah. And Ted Cruz. These are people who do not believe in any of the things that we grew up with. Right. They believe in this white trashionalist sort of nationalism, this grotesque new authoritarianism. And we get criticized for saying, oh, well, Trump's going to do this and that. Well, guess what? The biggest danger is those people get in office and get their way. All the bad things people fear and loathe about Trumpism will be packaged in a way that isn't as obviously physically and mentally deficient as Trump is. It would be packaged in a way where they could say, oh, well, this is what we believe now as Republicans. Not that those things are conservative anymore, because they're profoundly not conservative. But what they are is enormously dangerous.
Well, I think that's right too. And the thing is, you talked about whether or not, I mean, let's take the winterization piece in Texas, right? There was a story out this morning, I think in the Texas Tribune, that said that the Railroad Commission, which has it's misnamed as much as it could be, which really runs the oil and gas industry in Texas, was going to have a meeting, I think today or this week, about utilities winterizing their equipment. Now, winter starts in 3 weeks. Right. I don't know what the winterization process looks like, but my guess is it takes longer than 3 weeks. And I would also guess that a lot of these utilities and gas companies are going to say, no, we're not going to do that, because it's going to cost us a lot of money. And, no one's telling us. And that's exactly, Rick, why they deregulate. That's why they're not connected to the Eastern or Western grid, because they want to be that fully deregulated. But now, what I think that what Abbott shows is like sort of what the new Republican Party in power looks like, which is this weird, hyper libertarian, central control, only the powerful get to decide, and you're basically on your own, right? It's up to you to figure out how your kid's going to get educated. It's up to you to figure out, if the bodies are stacked up in the ER, where you're going to get your grandmother the MRI she needs inside of 6 months out. And even when it comes to utilities, and this is the kind of thing where, like, if a government's first and primary job is to protect its citizens, because that's the compact we make, right? We give you this authority through elections, and we expect that you will do A, B, and C. And A has always been, throughout history, keep us safe. They are now not only unwilling to keep their citizens safe in places like Texas and Florida, they're now actively trying to do things that will cost them their lives.
Look, I mean, Reed, this really speaks to, and this is where I also wish that our friends in the Democratic Party could organize a two-car motorcade. They've got a moment right now where they passed an infrastructure bill. They communicated on it for about a week, and then they stopped. They are seeing right now, look, we had record job growth last month. Record since 1965 or 69, something like that. And I'm not seeing them out there telling Americans, this is what we are doing for you. This is how we are going to help the economy and help your lives improve. And the Republicans are describing this like blighted, radioactive Mad Max hellscape of an economy, where the Democrats should be taking a march on it. They should be working that thing and saying, look, you can go back to what it looked like last year under Trump, when we mismanaged COVID and wrecked the economy, or we can do the work we're having to do now. It's hard work. It's not always fun, but here you are. There's an alternative. And it's just really difficult that they don't often pick up opportunities, spaces like that. And look, you've got a chance right now. If you're the Democrats in Texas, and the first big cold front hits and the grid goes down, Greg Abbott is in existential peril. Can they convert on that is another question. And that's one of the things that we try to help people do, is learn how to convert on these opportunities, learn how to, get in a fighting posture on these opportunities. But it is something they're going to have to take up the stick and go out and get into battle as we go forward into 2022.
Well, so, Rick, that's a good segue into the next thing I want to talk about, which is this idea of, and I would say this again, sticking with mostly the commentary at the Acela corridor, is this idea that like the world we knew somehow still exists, and it doesn't.
You're right.
And it's like, and a lot of this is, 2015, right? The American political system was being tectonically shaken. You were from my perspective, you were, if not the first, like in the top 3 people who said, this is what's going to happen, gang. Yeah. And now, but what happens is, look, I grew up inside the Beltway. Sure. I went back to work there in a presidential administration. You worked there for George H.W. Bush and Dick Cheney at the Defense Department. Is like that wall of the Beltway is not just a road. It really is this idea that the world we want exists here. Everyone that lives there like is absolutely essential to the governing of the republic. And if you took them
there
out
are
of
no
their job,
workers inside the Beltway,
right, everything would collapse. But I hearken back, Rick, to now, let's see, we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the Lincoln Project next month, which is hard to believe. It feels like a lot longer than that.
Well, it's dog years, folks.
I know. I mean, Rick and I used to have hair, guys. But I remember hearkening back to, those meetings with very earnest people, right?
You and I sat in a lot of those rooms together.
Yeah. And it was like, how are we going to, it was the basic dichotomy was, we want to beat Trump, but we want to believe the Republican Party exists without him, or is not, an adjunct of him. And I think the thing that you and I saw, and the Lincoln Project generally saw, was that whether you want to believe it or not, they are inextricably tied to one another at this point. Now, that doesn't mean that Trump will be on the ballot all the time, but it does mean that he is at the top of what our guy Trygve Olsen likes to call a vertical power structure, in which he sits in the bridal suite at Mar-a-Lago and can make a lot of people happy, a lot of people unhappy, raise a lot of money, and do the things that he wants to do within the construct of the Republican Party, because there is no challenger to him. I think we see this with the media too, which is like they're already bored by January 6th. They're already, they never really paid enough attention to the anti-voting stuff going on in the States, because, to them, it's all still sort of transactional bullshit. What bill is going to get passed here?
One side says and the other side says.
And it's like, and I'm fascinated by this, Rick, too, and I'm a little off the topic, which is I've found, and I've really been tuned into it the last few weeks, is that the right-wing media will hold on to something.
Oh, God.
And the left, the mainstream media and the left either retreats from it, right, or chases it. And I use, for example, Vice President Harris buys a Le Creuset pot in Paris. No surprise, like Fox and everybody else, like, oh, she bought an expensive pot in Paris while you're starving, like, which of course is not true, right? But then, like, they don't know how to handle it. Well, the point is like, no, you're the ones that killed the 500,000 Americans, from the Roosevelt room.
Right.
And, like, where is the party defending the vice president, right? Like, it's a horseshit attack, and like, they're leaving her out there on her own. And it just seems to me to be, she's an exemplar in the last few weeks of someone who, like, was asked to join the ticket, is doing, I think, the best she can given the circumstances, which vice president is a shit job, always has been.
It's the worst job.
But rather than rallying behind one of their own, right, like, they see it all as like, who's going to be next in line for the Democratic nomination if and when Joe Biden doesn't run, as opposed to like, hey guys, we have a fight 11 months hence, and we got to focus on that shit. And believe me, 2023 will shake out for a presidential nominating contest, and it will get figured out, because anything you're doing now will not survive first contact with your first trip to Iowa or New Hampshire or any of that shit. But they can't seem to get out of their own way. We usually accuse Republicans of being overly ambitious, but now I think we're seeing the Democrats too see, like, and maybe this is just an example again of the world we knew politically and the world we knew physically, right, pre-pandemic is gone. We don't know what the new world is going to look like, right? We're in this sort of weird transitionary phase. But like, whatever the old world is, like, gone. Like, it's in the history books. People are going to write about it. Like, how do we convince our friends and allies, like, this is what's happening and it's not going to stop?
Everything is changing forever, as they say. And the country changed politically starting in 2015, where the Republican Party was replaced by this populist nationalist monster. And we can talk more about like how it transformed individual leaders in a little bit. But the Democratic Party, I think there's a part of them, and you saw this in all the negotiations with Manchin and Sinema and over the infrastructure bill and Build Back Better. There's still this idea that Republicans, will go quietly and whisper to Chuck Schumer and other Democratic leaders, hey, listen, we want to work together on this. Forget all the noise on Fox. Let's make a deal. When in reality, what they're doing is saying, hey, come in this dark alley so we can shank you.
No. And then we're going to do it. And then you're going to go to the hospital, get healthy. And then you're going to walk by the same alley and do it again.
And walk back in again. Because these people are explicit in what they're going to do. Mitch McConnell has said, I will allow nothing to pass. Kevin McCarthy has been explicit. When he's speaker, he said already, I'm going to put Green and Gosar back on their committees. I'm going to have investigations of Biden. I'm going to impeach. These guys are explicit about it. The Democrats,
right? They never lie about what they're going to tell you they want
to
do.
They say it right out front. The Democrats need to learn the lesson. You are not here in a debating society. You are in a fucking street fight. You are in a hot war. You are not negotiating with people of good faith. And that comes back to what happened to Harris this weekend. You know, a lot of Democrats were immediately like, well, no, the pot is actually an affordable pot. Right. You can't go and fight these people with the idea that they're arguing in good faith. You have to go, oh, fuck you. Melania Trump posed in a goddamn gold lame bikini in a private jet so Donald Trump would have spank bank material. Get the fuck out of here. These people need to have their faces caved in, not this idea that, oh, we're gonna debate you on the merits of Le Creuset pots. They're fine. I have several. Okay, great. That's not the fight. The fight is the culture war fight, and they expect the Democrats to defend her in the way Democrats do. They don't expect people to punch them back in the face. They don't expect people to say, hey, look, here's Melania Trump pretending to eat diamonds in a photo. These people on the Democratic side, God love them. But it's like the bully comes out and says, I'm going to hit you. And they go, no, please don't hit me. I'd like to debate what your motivations are for hitting me. Then the bully hits them and they go, oh, that really hurt. Don't hit me again. And then the bully keeps hitting them and they keep trying to debate them instead of knifing them. It's astounding.
So I want to, so I don't know if you watch Yellowstone. Right?
I do.
But I think it was a couple of episodes ago, Beth, the
More
woman
Beth,
who plays
less Jimmy.
yeah, Beth, plays Kevin Costner's daughter in the show, and she's taken on this young man who's got no future. Yeah. She's going to a store to get him some new clothes.
Oh, yeah.
You know exactly what Rip says is going to happen. He's going to take advantage, and so she's trying to pull him out of the store. And there's a woman, a Karen, starts filming. Yeah. Beth in this interaction says, "That's child abuse. That's child abuse. That's child abuse." She's like, "I'm not abusing him." Beth grabs the phone out of the woman's hand, smashes it on the ground, and stomps it with her heel. And the woman said, "I don't want any trouble." And she said, "No, lady, you want trouble. You just don't want resistance."
Correct.
And I have to believe that Taylor Sheridan wrote that line on purpose.
I think so too.
Because I think it just perfectly summed up where we are, which is whether or not it's Bannon or Green or all these people, they want to be able to say what they want to say and do what they want to do. And they don't believe they will get any resistance because so far they haven't.
That's right.
Right. They've got there's no social stigma. There's no political or legal sanction for them. So they go out and say this crazy shit. Half the world, it gets the vapors. The other half of the world gnashes the teeth and say, yeah, go get them. But the point is you got to grab the phone out of Karen's hand and say, you don't want resistance and you're going to get some. And I think that's, if there's a lesson we can learn or teach, is you have to stand up to these people. And I think that's, if there was anything else, I think, going back 2 years, Rick, that I think people liked most about us was not even that we were former Republicans or we'd done this or with that, is that somebody finally stood up and said enough. Enough is enough.
Right.
And we're way past that point and we're still saying it. And so I think that, now is the time for all those folks that are listening and all the millions of people that, that follow us is resistance doesn't have to mean violence. In fact, it doesn't mean violence, but what it does mean is that you're not going to put up with the bullshit anymore, whether it's from your neighbor or your friend or the asshole who comes to the school board meeting who doesn't have kids, there. You don't have to put up with this shit, right? Being an American and being civil doesn't mean you have to get rolled over at every occasion.
Right. And I mean, look, the opposite of, in a weird way, the opposite of violence is strength, because people who are bullies, people who think that you can mediate politics through violence, as the party believes, by the way, as the Republican Party believes, they still believe to this day that January 6th wasn't wrong. It just didn't work. But showing strength and determination and not putting up with that crap from these people is something that has two benefits. one, it makes you understand your own strengths. It makes you understand that you can fight, you can resist, you can do the work, you can push back, you can win. It also, it has a psychological reaction to bullies. When they get pushed back on, whether it's verbally or physically, they almost always collapse and they almost always fall back. And it's a lesson we've tried to teach folks over and over again, that if you have people who are doing things that are wrong and you call their shit, they often fall apart. Look, you're right. There's no sanction on these people like Gosar and Green, because right now corporate donations are still flooding into the National Republican Congressional Committee, and the committee is still supporting Matt Gaetz and Madison Cawthorn and and Lauren Boebert and everybody else in the mutant parade. They're still funding them. There's no sanction against them from corporate America. We've done some work in that space, with Toyota and AT&T and others. But it is certainly something that showing how we showed people how to push back on those groups, and they often fall back when you push.
No, I think that's right, and that will be a sustained effort. The corporate campaign will be a sustained and consistent effort as we go into 2022, because it is time to hold these people accountable for the decisions they made. Because again, Rick, they believe that we live in the old world. All right, but I want to turn to someone you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, and we're going to run a few minutes long here, gang. So just I hope you hang with us. I see there are really like 4 roads in the GOP right now. Mm-hmm. The first is a very narrow and lonely road, and that's like where Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger live, right?
Right, and the secret 20 who support them but can't say it publicly.
Right. Well, they walk on the sidewalk hitchhiking, hoping they don't get hit by a car. But that's probably still that. Let's just put it this way: it's marginal, but not marginal enough to make a difference in probably a close race against in a primary, right? Right. The second road are the true believers, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and these people you mentioned. And I think probably, if there are 180 some or 205 members of the Republican caucus, probably 180 members of those. And when I say they're true believers, what I mean is that they are true believers in the movement that we're seeing on the right in this country, which is not, Trump is the leader of it, but not necessarily about Trump, which is they're okay with us being Hungary or Turkey or some sort of Russia, right? They're okay with the sort of democracy in name only kind of piece of it.
They're okay with the Ba'ath Party version of America.
Right.
Where the dear leader and his party get 108% of the vote every 2 years.
Right. The third piece is, those who still fear Trump because of their own potential power. And I think the poster child of that is Kevin McCarthy, as you mentioned. Now, I don't believe he's ever going to be Speaker of the House. No. Because what we saw was, his 8.5-hour insanity last week before the Build Back Better vote was like basically begging the true Republicans, which I'm going to call them now, to leave him alone, right? To let him stay in charge, to let him hold that gavel, in January of 23 if Republicans retake the House. And then late, over the weekend, Marjorie Taylor Greene just rips his face off, right? Talking about how he's not a true believer and how he's weak and all this other stuff. Then she posts a tweet that says, just had a great call with, Kevin McCarthy, really believe in his vision. We know what he said, Rick, which is, Marjorie, I'll give you whatever you want when I'm back in charge. Just please leave me alone.
Right. That's exactly what, look, I tweeted this weekend, I'm like, meet the new chairman of the House Budget Committee.
Right.
And I don't necessarily think she's smart, but I think she's crafty. And if she was smart, she extracted a lot more out of him than he's going to get out of her, of good behavior from her. Because he's
again, it's what she displays is not unlike what Trump displays, which is not a traditional sort of intellectual intelligence, but a very lizard brain, cunning instinct for what her people want.
Right. And so, she won that battle, and it should say to everybody, again, and also all those corporate sponsors of the GOP, of the National Republican Congressional Committee, they need to understand they're paying for that now. They own Marjorie Taylor Greene now. They own Gosar, Gates, Cawthorn, Boebert, all the kooks. They own them. They are investing in them because Kevin is not going to be an independent voice. He's not going to be somebody who stands up and delivers on things that are principled. He's going to basically bow down to those people to hold power. He is the classic Vichy Republican.
Right.
You
But
know,
here's what we know, Rick, because we're anthropologists of the worst people on the planet, which is when the time comes, they're gonna call him into the alley and shiv him too.
Of course. And look, you can't focus group your way out of the crazy anymore in the Republican Party.
Right.
You either join the crazy, like your 4 lanes theory here is.
I haven't even gotten to the fourth one yet because we're still
do the 4th lane, but yeah.
All right. So and then the 4th one, which I guess McCarthy could go sort of back and forth in, is just like unadorned personal ambition, right? Which is I don't believe in any of this shit. I don't believe any of it, but this is the easiest path to advancement. So I'm going to go along with it because as I've seen other people do it, no one gets in trouble for it. No one loses for it. Trump, again, being a special case, which is he's one of a kind. But we see this with Cruz. We see it with Josh Hawley. We see it with Tom Cotton. And then we saw it this weekend with even Tim Scott down at Mar-a-Lago.
Reed, that's a great point. Tim Scott was a guy who was critical of the president on the during January 6th. He always played an interesting and careful game with Trump. He was never like a cheerleader. But now that he knows that Trump is running again and that Trump is holding auditions for VP, he went down to Mar-a-Lago this weekend, fully embraced the big lie that Trump won the election. And, when even the Trump people are saying, oh, he was incredibly deferential, he was right for these things are not a surprise. These things are not a shock to us. The collapse of any integrity or moral principle on the part of Republicans, no matter which ones they are, guys, at the end of the day, Trump finds whatever that niche, that little tiny gap in your armor is, and poisons your life. And Tim Scott.
Didn't you write a book about this?
I did write a book about this.
I think it was called Everything Trump Touches Dies.
Yes, and in fact, it was a New York Times #1 bestseller, which I will keep on my resume till I'm dead.
Well, I will say this: you know who isn't a New York Times bestseller?
Yes, I do.
Chris Christie. Which means that he could not sell gang. I didn't realize, Rick. When I say this, please understand that I'm not being hard on you. Yeah. You have to sell 12,000 books to get on that list. And Chris Christie couldn't sell. I bet he didn't sell 12 goddamn books.
He sold 400 hardcover and a total of 2,200 audio, ebook, and hardcover. 400 hardcover.
So he's got about 2,600 relatives.
Right. Take the L, Chris. Okay. Take the goddamn L. But yeah, look, and there are people in our old tribe who the last couple of weeks were like, have you seen Chris Christie going on TV to defend? And I'm like, who are you kidding? Chris Christie, I will be the Republican nominee before Chris Christie is. And that's saying something, folks. It's that ability to delude yourself that has made the Republican Party right now, it's put it in the spot that it's in. And that delusion, look, delusions are comfortable things. People love them. They love thinking, oh, Liz Cheney's going to primary Donald Trump and beat him. No, she's not. It's not going to happen.
She might primary him.
She might primary him.
But even if she did, I don't think that Congresswoman Cheney would go into it with any illusions about the outcome.
Correct. I mean, people around every presidential candidate have a degree of they're picking out curtains in their office in the West Wing. Okay. But they're imagining themselves as the next Karl Rove or whatever it is, right? But we have been in a fight now for 5 years against Trump and Trumpism, where I'm a guy who singularly lacks illusions about about Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy coming to save the Republican Party from Donald Trump. As long as he's alive and not in jail, he's the nominee if he wants it. And it's sort of a giant waste of time for parts of the Never Trump movement and parts of the Democratic movement, small d, Democratic movement, to worry about scenarios that aren't him. I mean, look, yes, again, eaten by a shark, struck by a meteor, slapped in jail, maybe. But look, Trump could Lyndon LaRouche it and still run from jail and probably win the
Right.
Republican nomination.
For sure.
Political prisoner Donald Trump.
Well, look, that's the downside of something like this, is that whether or not it's people who storm the steps, who are now the freedom fighters of J6, or Steve Bannon, they'll be martyred by
Sure.
this crazy movement, and you just have to accept that that's going to be part of it and go with the accountability. And they're like, I'm sure there are people like, it's like, well, if we don't do anything, like maybe this will all pass us by. Like history never passes you by. It never does. Like throughout the 10,000 years of recorded human history, history has never left the individual human being alone. It doesn't.
It
never has. And the more that you try and ignore it, the more it will come for you. So Rick, let's talk a little bit about this, because we got a few extra minutes and I appreciate you hanging with me.
Oh, of course. Please.
This isn't a fight about Donald Trump. This isn't a fight about Republicans versus Democrats, right? When we say we want to go out and defeat Republicans, it's not for the sake of defeating Republicans. It's because that is, in our estimation, and we've been right more often than we'd like, is that in 2022 and 2024, the defeat of the Republican Party electorally and significantly is the fastest and best path back to some sort of functioning two-party system, which is Republicans must lose badly, repeatedly, before someone will say, we tried that for a few years, voters don't want it anymore. Like we've got to, even we are ultimately bound by market economics, even if it's in politics.
Right. And to keep the economics analogy rolling, we want to raise the opportunity cost of being a hyper-nationalist, authoritarian populist. We want to raise that political cost. We want to make it less desirable. We want to weaken that part of the party. And it is a very big challenge, folks. We don't undertake this lightly. We swagger about the kind of work we can do, but we don't when it comes to the scale of the problem we face as a party, as a movement facing up against a political party that has become profoundly dangerous to the future of American democracy. And the idea of fighting a movement like this is something that's kind of alien to people. Look, we had the luxury in America of predictable politics that had this kind of homeostatic balance between the two parties, left and right, for generations.
Right.
Where the left never had too much power for too long, the right never had too much power for too long, and nobody was ever super happy about the outcomes.
Well, but even then, if you go back, and this is a long time ago now, all things considered, there was enough. The parties themselves were heterogeneous enough internally, right, that allowed for this mixing and matching. You had blue dog Democrats, you had Rockefeller Republicans. Remember that it was, in the 60s, right? Remember, without Republican votes in 64, 65, with
no Civil Rights Act,
those things don't happen.
Correct.
Right. And that was a lot of Northern Republicans who did those things. And so I think that, that's the other part too, is that the parties have become very, homogeneous as far as ideology is concerned. And probably 75, 80% of the middle, the country in the middle, is like, well, I don't believe 100% of everything all the time, right? It's just not human nature. So I guess my question to you is like, what can folks do here? Because, I think the thing that I hear a lot, you and I are out on the road a lot, is, okay, but what comes next? And our knee-jerk reaction is to say, like, we're in this trench here, and we have to get to this next trench, and then the next trench before we can go over and like sign the peace treaty at the palace. But I think that's sometimes, from my perspective, like, we're not telling people what the fight is worth. And I think the fight is worth like the ability, to go back to the founding, to literally the founding of the Republic, which is, the ability to live as you see fit, your version of happiness, free of, things that, you don't want to be bothered by a lot. Listen, the whole point of representative government is that you elect someone else to do that job for you with the understanding that they'll do it as they should. And to live your life as you want to, as a responsible citizen. And it seems to me now that a lot of folks don't understand, like, these are not complicated things. They're simple things, but they're profound.
Yeah, and look, we as a country, despite our imperfect origins, have slowly bent that arc in the correct direction over time. And respect for individual rights and individual liberty, I view those things as fundamentally American values. And I believe that those values are at risk and at stake in a fight that's ahead of us. And it's too big of a fight to ignore selling the upside a little bit. Look, we are not Pollyannas, and we're not telling people, we never tell people, oh, it's going to all be fine. Everything's going to be sunshine and roses, and we're going to all have a national puppies and kittens program. We're not going to do that. But there is a goal in mind. There is a goal in mind where we have two or three or more political parties in this country that do fight about ideas and present voters with a set of meritorious arguments for the benefits of supporting them, as opposed to apocalyptic culture war on the right and apocalyptic panic on the left. And I think it is important that we remind people that America does not have to be a dysfunctional democracy. We do not have to be a Republican crisis. We can be a better country. We can be a country where there is hope, where there is opportunity, where we have unbelievably passionate battles about things like, should the marginal tax rate be 38.6% or 32.5%? We can fight those things out. How many parts per billion of carbon should be in the atmosphere or not? We can fight those things out. But until we get to that point, we're in a fight to decide whether or not we are a constitutional republic. We're in a fight to decide whether or not we believe in fundamental democratic principles, or if we believe in the authoritarian power of the strongman. And there are a lot of people in this country, in our former party, that are okay with that latter option right now. And that's why we're still in this fight. That's why 2022 is going to get very hot. That's why we believe that the kind of toolkit we bring to this fight is unique. And folks are welcome to criticize us all day long. We make plenty of mistakes.
Well, they always do.
They always do. We make plenty of mistakes. Okay, plenty of mistakes. But we don't make a mistake about this. We see the danger posed by an authoritarian movement led by Donald Trump and his acolytes with very, very clear vision. And again, folks, you know what? Reed would like to be off raising goats. I really would. I would like to be a goat restoring antique airplanes and enjoying my swamp. Okay, love that, but we can't, and we don't get that option yet. We don't get that luxury yet, because this fight is ongoing, and we're going to have to stay in it. It's going to stay hot for a long time, and they're going to have to drag us out feet first.
Well, I would say this, Rick, is just to give folks a sense of who are watching and listening. There are, in my mind, two versions of this country and two options, right? This is, again, these things are not complicated. There's one version of the country that's President Joe Biden over the weekend talking to a little girl who stutters. Yeah. And he says, just work through it. You'll get through it. You'll get through it. And then looks around for her parents and says, why don't you come down and see me at the White House? Mm-hmm. Right? That's a father. That's a grandfather. That's someone who understands that decency and kindness are examples of strength.
Correct.
Right? Not weakness. And then the other side is like a rerun or a loop of The Walking Dead with zombies just marching around, and it's every man and woman for themselves. And that is not what a democracy is. That is not what we believe we want. And I don't believe that that's what the vast majority of Americans want. But I think that, it's a pretty stark choice. And I think that, between you and me and the rest of the folks and B and all the folks that work hard at the Lincoln Project, like, that's the fight we're going to take, guys. And I hope that you all will join us. Sign up at lincolnproject.us. We're going to have hundreds of thousands of volunteer opportunities in key states across the country in key districts. And I hope that you will join us in the site. You will hear more from us on next week, and the following week. And, we have...
Laying out the roadmap.
laying out the roadmap, and we're currently programming the first week of January because, guys, can you believe it? We're coming up on a year since January 6th. And if that doesn't remind us just what it's at stake, I don't know that anything will. But look, Rick, I want to thank you for joining me today.
Man, good conversation today.
Yeah, everyone who's listening, I want to thank you for giving us an extra 15 minutes. When Rick and I get caffeinated and get going, it's sometimes hard to stop us. As always, thank you all so much. I will see you Friday, and we'll see you Tuesday, tomorrow, Thursday night on the breakdown, Wednesday night on We're Speaking, and I will have a couple of great guests on the podcast this week. Thanks, everybody.
Good. Thanks, folks.
Take care.